Hello, I'm Anita and Thomas. Welcome to the session on Heraclitus. Heraclitus of Ephesus, who lived between 535 and 475 BC, was a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher from Ephesus on the Ionian coast of modern-day Turkey. He is sometimes mentioned in connection with the Ephesian school of philosophy, although he was really the only prominent member of that school. He was the first Western philosopher to go beyond physical theory in search of metaphysical foundations and moral applications, and some consider him, along with Parmenides, the most significant of the pre-Socratic philosophers. His idea of a universe is in constant change, but with an underlying order or reason, which he called logos. It forms the essential foundation of the European worldview. Many subsequent philosophers, from Plato to Aristotle, from the Stoics to the Church Fathers, from George Hegel to Alfred North Whitehead, have claimed to have been influenced by the ideas of Heraclitus. According to the 3rd century historian Diogenes Laertius, Heraclitus flourished in the 69th Olympiad, but the dates of his birth and death are just guesswork based on that. So, all we can say that it is likely that he was born around 535 BC. We do know that he was born to an aristocratic family in Ephesus, an important city on the Ionian coast of modern-day Turkey. His father was named Blosen and was a powerful figure in the city. But according to Diogenes Laertius, Heraclitus abdicated the kingship in favor of his brother and had no interest in politics or power. As a youth, he was a prodigious intellect, and he claimed to have taught himself everything he knew by a process of self-questioning. Some sources also say that he was a pupil of Xenophanes, who lived between 570 and 480 BC. He was sometimes known as the obscure, that means the dark, for the deliberate difficulty and vagueness of his teachings. He was also known as the weeping philosopher, and it was speculated that he was prone to melancholia or depression, which prevented him from finishing some of his works. There is no record of his traveling even as far as the nearby learning center of Miletus, although he seems to have been familiar with the ideas of Milesian school. He was apparently something of a misanthrope and a loner, and he cultivated an aristocratic disdain for the masses and favored the rule of a few wise men. He was not afraid to scorn and denigrate almost everyone, from the Ephesians to the Athenians to the Persian leader Darius. He believed that the poet Hesiod and Pythagoras lacked understanding, and claimed that Homer and Archilochus deserved to be beaten. Diogenes Laertius reported that later in life he wandered the mountains, eating only grass and herbs. His years of wandering in the wilderness resulted in an oedema and impairment of vision. After 24 hours of his own idiosyncratic treatment, he died and was interred in the marketplace of Ephesus. Theory of knowledge. Heraclitus sees the great majority of human beings as lacking understanding. Of his world's being forever do men prove to be uncomprehending, both before they hear and once they have heard it. For although all things happen according to this word, they are like the inexperienced experiencing words and deeds. Other men are unaware of what they do when they are awaking, just as they are forgetful of what they do when they are asleep. Most people sleepwalk through life, not understanding what is going on about them. Yet, experience of words and deeds can enlighten those who are receptive to their meaning. On the one hand, Heraclitus commends sense experience, the things of which there is sight, hearing, experience, I prefer. On the other hand, poor witnesses for men are their eyes and ears if they have barbarian souls. A barbarian is one who does not speak the Greek language. Thus, while sense experience seems necessary for understanding, if we do not know the right language, we cannot interpret the information the senses provide. Heraclitus does not give a detailed and systematic account of the respective roles of experience and reason in knowledge, but we can learn something from his manner of expression. Describing the practice of religious prophets, Heraclitus says, "The Lord whose oracle is at Delphi neither reveals nor conceals, but gives a sign." Similarly, Heraclitus does not reveal or conceal, but produces complex expressions that have encoded in them multiple messages for those who can interpret them. He uses puns, paradoxes, antitheses, parallels, and various rhetorical and literary devices to construct expressions that have meanings beyond the obvious. This practice, together with his emphasis on the word logos as an ordering principle of the world, suggests that he sees his own expressions as imitations of the world with its structural and semantic complexity. To read Heraclitus, the reader must solve verbal puzzles, and to learn to solve these puzzles is to learn to read the signs of the world. Heraclitus stresses the inductive rather than the deductive method of grasping the world, a world that is rationally structured if we can but discern its shape. For those who can discern it, the word has no overriding message to impart. Listening not to me but to the word, it is wise to agree that all things are one. It is perhaps Heraclitus' chief project to explain in what sense all these things are one. The doctrine of flux and the unity of opposites. According to both Plato and Aristotle, Heraclitus held extreme views that led to logical incoherence. For he held that everything is constantly changing and opposite things are identical, so that everything is and is not at the same time. In other words, universal flux and the identity of opposites entail a denial of the law of non-contradiction. Plato indicates the source of the flux doctrine. Heraclitus, I believe, says that all things go and nothing stays, and comparing existence to the flow of a river, he says you could not step twice into the same river. What Heraclitus actually says is the following: on those stepping into rivers, staying the same other and other waters flow. There is an antithesis between same and other. The sentence says that different waters flow in rivers staying the same. In other words, though the waters are always changing, the rivers stay the same. Indeed, it must be precisely because the waters are always changing that there are rivers at all, rather than the lakes or ponds. The message is that rivers can stay the same over time, even though or indeed because the waters change. The point then is not that everything is changing, but the fact that some things change and it makes possible the continued existence of other things. Perhaps more generally, the change in elements or constituents supports the constancy of higher level structures. As for the alleged doctrine of the identity of opposites, Heraclitus does believe in some kind of unity of opposites. For instance, God is day, night, winter, summer, war, peace. satiety, hunger. But if we look closer, we see that the unity in question is not identity. As the same thing in us is living and dead, waking and sleeping, young and old, for those things having changed around are those, and conversely those having changed around are these. And Heraclitus insists on the common sense truth of change. Cold things warm up, the hot cools off, wet becomes dry, dry becomes wet. This sort of mutual change presupposes the non-identity of the terms. What Heraclitus wishes to maintain is not the identity of opposites, but the fact that they replace each other in a series of transformations. They are interchangeable or transformationally equivalent. Thus, Heraclitus does not hold universal flux, but recognizes a law-like flux of elements, and he does not hold the identity of opposites, but the transformational equivalence of opposites. The views that he does hold do not jointly or separately entail a denial of the law of non-contradiction. Heraclitus does, to be sure, make paradoxical statements, but his views are no more self-contradictory than are the paradoxical claims of Socrates. They are presumably meant to wake us up from our dogmatic slumbers. Knowledge. Plato held that for Heraclitus knowledge is made impossible by the flux of sensible objects. Yet, Heraclitus does not repudiate knowledge or the wisdom that comes from a proper understanding of the world. To be sure, he believes most people are not capable of wisdom. Understanding is a rare and precious commodity which even most reputed sages do not attain to. Yet, wisdom is possible, and it is embedded in Heraclitus' message for those who can discern it. Heraclitus seems to accept the evidence of the senses as in some way valuable. The things of which there is sight, hearing, experience I prefer. Sight is the best of the senses. The eyes are more accurate witnesses than the ears. Yet in contrast to those who view knowledge as an accumulation of information or wisdom as a collection of sayings, he requires much more than sensation and memory. Learning many things do not teach understanding, else it would have taught Hesiod and Pythagoras as well as Xenophanes. In this statement, Heraclitus reviews the leading authorities of his day dealing with religious and secular knowledge and finds them all wanting. They spend too much effort in collecting information and not enough in grasping its meaning. What intelligence or understanding do the people have? Asks Heraclitus. They follow popular bards and treat the crowd as their instructor, not realizing that the many are base while the few are noble. He criticizes Hesiod on specifies, the teacher of the multitude is Hesiod. They believe he has the greatest knowledge, who did not comprehend day and night, for they are one. In his myths, Hesiod treats day and night as separate persons, taking turns traveling abroad while one remains at home. But this fails to capture the interconnectedness of day and night and falsifies reality. Heraclitus criticizes Homer, Pythagoras, and Archilochus for their inadequacies. In general, Heraclitus holds that people do not learn what they should. Many do not understand such things as they encounter, nor do they learn by their experience, but they think they do. Indeed, they do not process the information they receive. Having heard without comprehension, they are like the deaf. This saying bears witness to them, Presently they are absent. Heraclitus explains as follows: poor witnesses for men are the eyes and ears of those who have barbarian souls. Most people perceive without understanding the world around them. Sense perception is necessary for knowledge but not sufficient. Without the ability to decipher information from the senses, one cannot understand the world. What chance is there then to learn the secrets of the world? Heraclitus is not wholly pessimistic about human cognitive abilities. All men have a share in self-knowledge and sound thinking. What is needed is not simply more sense experience or more information, but an improved way of comprehending the message, logos, that the world offers. In this context, his curious method of expression begins to make sense. He presents his statements in the form of puzzles, riddles, and summary. Many of them support two or more readings and contain hidden insights. To comprehend them, the reader must grasp their complexity and then discover their unity. To read Heraclitus appropriately is to have a rich cognitive experience, as the philosopher hints in his introduction. Heraclitus often presents a simple concrete situation or image which has implications for our understanding of the world: a river, a bow, a road. He does not generally pronounce generalizations and deduce consequences. Rather, his method can be seen as inductive. He offers an example which suggests general principles. Unlike most philosophers, he challenges the right brain rather than the left. He does not teach in the conventional sense. He offers his reader materials for understanding and lets them educate themselves. He cites with approval a model of religious instruction. Ontology. The standard view of Heraclitus' ontology since Aristotle is that he is a material monist who holds that fire is the ultimate reality. All things are just manifestations of fire. According to Aristotle, the Milesians in general were material monists who advocated other kinds of ultimate matter. Thales, water; Anaximander, the boundless; Anaxi means air. So, Heraclitus' theory was just another version of a common background theory. There are already problems with Aristotle's understanding of the Milesians. Aristotle lacks any textual evidence for Thales' view and must reconstruct it out of almost nothing. He sometimes treats Anaximander as a pluralist, like Anaxagoras, who thinks the boundless is a mixture of qualities. At most, Anaximenes might exemplify material monism, but Plato reads him as a pluralist. In the case of Heraclitus, his own statements make material monism problematic as an interpretation. According to material monism, some kinds of matters is the ultimate reality, and any variation in the world consists merely of qualitative or possibly quantitative change in it. For there is only one reality, for instance, fire, which can never come into existence or perish, but can only change in its appearances. Heraclitus, however, advocates a radical kind of change. For souls, it is death to become water; for water, death to become earth. But from earth, water is born, and from water, soul. The language of birth and death in the world of living things is precisely the language used in Greek metaphysics for coming to be and perishing. It implies a radical transformation that rules out continuing identity. Indeed, interpreters of Heraclitus cannot have it both ways. Heraclitus cannot be both a believer in radical flux and advocate of monism. either he must believe in a merely illusory or at most a limited kind of change, or he must be a pluralist. One further difficulty remains for the monist reading. In Heraclitus' alleged version of monism, fire is the ultimate reality. Yet, fire is the least substantial and the most evanescent of elemental stuffs. It makes a better symbol of change than of permanence. Other alleged cases of material monism offer a basic kind of matter that could arguably stable and permanent over long periods of time. But fire manifests need and satiety, a kind of ongoing consumption that can live only by devouring fuel. Is not Heraclitus' choice of a basic reality itself paradoxical? At best, his appeal to fire seems to draw on material monism in a way that points beyond the theory of an account in which the process of change is more real than the material substances that undergo change. Cosmology. Although Heraclitus is more than a cosmologist, he does offer a cosmology. His most fundamental statement on cosmology is found: this world order, cosmos, the same of all, no God nor man did create, but it ever was and is and will be, ever living fire, kindling in measures and being quenched in measures. In this passage, he uses for the first time in any extant Greek text the word cosmos, order, to mean something like world. He identifies the world with fire, but goes on to specify portions of fire that are kindling and being quenched. Although ancient sources including Aristotle as well as the Stoics attributed to Heraclitus a world that was periodically destroyed by fire and then reborn, the present statement seems to contradict that view, as Hegel already noticed. If the world always was and is and will be, then it does not perish and come back into existence, though portions of it are constantly being transformed. Heraclitus describes the transformations of elementary bodies, the turnings of fire, first sea, and of sea half is earth, half fire burst. Earth is liquefied as sea and measured into the same proportion as it had before it became earth. Fire turns into water, sea, and then half of that quantity turns into earth and half into fire burst. The portion that becomes earth turns back into water in the same quantity it had previously. Here, Heraclitus envisages a law-like transformation of stuff from fire to water to earth. The transformation is reversible, and in it, the same relative quantities of stuff are preserved. There is then a kind of conservation of matter, or at least overall quantity of matter. What would make the world to be continuous would be the fact that when one portion of fire turns into water, an equivalent portion of water turns into fire. The overall equilibrium is preserved even if the water that is now in the sea is not the same water as was in it before. This picture bears a similarity to the image of the river, which remains the same despite its changing material contents. In this view of the world, the mutual transformations of matter are not an accidental feature, but the very essence of nature. Without change, there would be no world. Heraclitus seems to acknowledge this in his praise of war and strife. We must recognize that war is common, strife is justice, and all things happen according to strife and necessity. War is father of all and king of all, and some he manifested as gods, some as men, some he made slaves, some free. Conflicting powers of opposites, including those of elemental bodies, make possible the world and all its variety. Without that conflict, we would have only lifeless uniformity. Heraclitus provided some sort of discussion of meteorological and astronomical phenomena. He studied the disappearance and the reappearance of the moon at the end and beginning of a month. It is the clearest evidence that Heraclitus had a scientific interest in astronomy. He explained the sun and moon as bowls full of fire. As the moon's bowl rotated, it caused the phases. Eclipses were the result of a rotation of the convex side of the bowls to face the earth. We have no reports about the earth itself, but we may suppose that, like his predecessors, Heraclitus viewed it as flat. Evaporation from the earth and sea apparently provided fuel for the heavenly bodies, which burnt like oil lamps. Divine power is manifest in all phenomena. God is day, night, winter, summer, war, peace, satiety, hunger, and he alters just as fire, when it is mixed with spices, is named according to the aroma of each of them. Again, Heraclitus seems to stress the unity of divine power, even if humans assign different names and attributes to it. All things that happen are good, but humans do not perceive them to be so. To God, all things are fair, good and just, but men suppose some things are unjust, some just. Heraclitus does not attempt to provide a detailed theodicy, but seeks to view all things sub specie, in which conflicts keeps the world going. Now, you please try to answer a few questions. Explain the philosophy of Heraclitus. Briefly narrate the life sketch of Heraclitus. Distinguish the ideas of Heraclitus with anyone of contemporary philosophers. Critically analyze the Heraclitus thoughts on war and aristocracy. Why Heraclitus is known as the Dark? What was the methodology of teachings of Heraclitus? How Heraclitus perceiving human knowledge and wisdom? Books for further reading. The Pre-Socratic Philosophers by Jonathan Barnes, Routledge, London, 1982. Criticism of Ionian Philosophy by Daniel W. Graham, 1997. Epistemology and Meaning in Heraclitus, Language and Logos by Edward Hussey, edited by M. Schofield and M. C. Nussbaum, Cambridge, 1982. Hope today's session was enriching. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.